We've all heard that old saying, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. We've heard it tossed around casually. It lightly rolls off the tongue quick, but catches its target with a slow, steady weight. Much like the weight we endure when we hold on to the American belief that if you just work hard, you can overcome and achieve anything. But what about that person that has no boots nor straps? My name is Pinkins, and I'm a retired Army officer and co-founder and president of the Pyramid Project, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping youth from poor and underserved communities. More than 20 years ago, before I joined the Army, I went down to the Mississippi Delta. I met a kid. He had to be no more than 13 years old. He lived in an old shack. The shack was sandwiched between a cotton field and a long dirt road. On the other side of that dirt road was a fast-flowing creek. When he came out of that shack, I noticed that he had no shoes on. He must have felt the rocks beneath his feet as he made his way down the gravel driveway. His dog, Smokey, was following right behind him. It was summertime, and the Mississippi sun was beating down on the back of our necks. We made it to the end of the driveway and crossed that dirt road, his toes sinking into the dust like sand on a beach. We stopped at an old rickety mailbox. It was leaning over, barely standing. A slight breeze could have blown it over. He pointed past that mailbox and said excitedly, "There's tons of big old catfish in that creek. I go fishing here sometimes." We laughed. He opened the mailbox and pulled out a stack of letters. Thumbing through them, and to his surprise, one was addressed to him. It was from his school. The school year had ended several weeks earlier, so this must have been his final report card, he thought. He was an excellent student. "I just enjoy learning," he told me once. He rarely missed a day of school. And each day when he got home, he went straight to his room and did his homework. Standing next to that mailbox, he was so excited to share his grades with his parents, how well he had done, and that he'd be passing on to the 8th grade. In his excitement, he dropped the rest of the letters in the dirt. They rested next to his bare, dust-covered feet as his dog, Smokey, curiously sniffed each envelope. He tore open his letter and read off his grades with pride. A, B, A, B, F? Wait, what? Despite doing everything right, completing all his homework assignments, passing all of his exams, and rarely missing a day of school, his math teacher decided to give him an F. Standing next to that mailbox, the realization that he would have to redo the 7th grade began to dawn on him, because he already knew in order to progress to the 8th, he had to pass 7th grade math. He collapsed to his knees, and he cried, and he began to give up. Mississippi ranks near last in educational attainment. While the national graduation rate is about 85%, in some Mississippi school districts, the graduation rate is as low as 65%. Ironically, Mississippi's superintendent of education is the highest paid public schools official in the country, making $300,000 a year, nearly double the national average. So the state with one of the worst performing education systems has the highest paid public schools official. Let that marinate for a minute. According to the Census Bureau, the national poverty rate is about 12%. In some counties in the Mississippi Delta, child poverty exceeds 50% and is as high as 60%. Mississippi, a state with some of the most fertile farmland in the country, faces the worst food insecurity and hunger rates in the nation. In some rural areas, nearly 40% of children don't have access to a supermarket or a grocery store. Generation after generation of Mississippians feel trapped by and within this system. So that old saying, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, doesn't work for them. They feel trapped in a never-ending cycle of poverty that's stunning their growth and is fixable. In the 21st century, exposing youth from poor, poverty-stricken, underserved communities to the social, cultural, economic capital outside their normal circumstances, that's their civil rights cause today. That's why my wife, Sabrina, and I, we created the Pyramid Project. Our goal is to expose youth from these communities to the social, cultural, and economic capital to help them fulfill their dreams. We believe that kids, they do what they're supposed to do. Of course, some make mistakes like we expect them to. But for the most part, they go to school, they listen to their parents, and they stay out of trouble. Each year, we invite youth from underserved communities to the nation's capital, where they meet professionals like business owners, doctors, educators, and lawyers who just so happen to come from their similar circumstances. They meet their elected officials and gain exposure to resources and possibilities that for far too long has been shielded from them by poverty. Participants in our organization have gone on to get accepted to major universities or join the military, positioning themselves on a pathway out of poverty. Unfortunately, youth from underserved communities, poverty-stricken communities, poor communities, they don't get access to resources, opportunities, and experiences outside their community. Yet and still, many of them still go on and graduate high school. And we ask them to conquer the world without having received the proper tools. Oftentimes, many of them crumble, and the cycle continues. It was more than 20 years ago when that little kid shared his story with me. About 5 years ago, on a trip back down to the Mississippi Delta, I drove out to that old shack that was sandwiched between that cotton field and that long dirt road. He wasn't there anymore. That old shack was barely standing, now dark and unoccupied. That rickety old mailbox, it was gone. The grass had grown tall along that creek. There was no little dog running around. I stared at the spot in the middle of that dirt road, and I wondered, how had life turned out for him? Well, 2 years ago, on a cold December day, I walked out my front door and down my driveway. As snowflakes fell, melting on the back of my neck, I crossed the street and stood next to a set of mailboxes. I opened my mailbox, and inside there was a large letter. I read the letter and closed my eyes and thought to myself, despite having failed at my first attempt at 7th grade, I didn't give up and found myself on an amazing journey around the world. Standing there in the snow, I thought about all the experiences that I had been lucky enough to get exposed to. language and cultural immersion from living in or visiting over 23 countries while serving in the Army. Graduating from college while taking courses in a war zone. Developing diplomacy skills in meeting presidents and heads of state. Completing my tour of duty while literally sleeping in the White House, where I had the privilege to not only fulfill my duty to the country, but serve in a capacity where public officials could serve the broader citizenry. And for that, I am grateful. Those experiences gave me a level of exposure that taught me how to expand my social networks, prepared me for advanced educational training, lifted me out of poverty, and enabled me to support my family and my children. As I read that letter that cold December day, I could not help but wonder if the 12-year-old me from 3 decades ago could have ever thought that he would be accepted into a major law school. Particularly if I had not overcome my first major challenge in the 7th grade. See, if you haven't come to it yet, the little boy in the story is me. The little boy in the story is me. And he is the influence that triggered me and my wife to create the Pyramid Project. Today, like I said, we bring kids from underserved communities to the nation's capital so that they can gain exposure to experiences that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. I see myself as a test case, proof that exposure to cultural resources, new experiences, and social networks that can open the doors to opportunity can mean the difference between a cycle of poverty or success in life. It is incumbent upon us all to provide boots and bootstraps to kids growing up with bare feet. This is one of the greatest civil rights causes of our time. Thank you.